welcome to the Ideas Factory. Welcome to this episode. With me is Professor Pant, and we'll be looking at the developments that took around India, its neighbors in the world. And when we talk about the developments that took place, top of the mind is also the national security report that came out, the interim national security report that came out in America, and which kind of highlights the policies of the Biden administration, Harsh. And it's a 24-page report. And when you look at it, China has been mentioned umpteen times. And it clearly shows that China is the focus of the policy. And the whole policy centers around countering that very assertive China, a very aggressive China. And the way China has risen, that's a big challenge for the US, a challenge of a very assertive China. And it probably mentions China 20 times. It also talks of revitalizing the democracy. It talks of strengthening US alliances. So your perspective on this interim report and that challenge from China that US faces, and what is its policy to deal with that challenge?
Thanks, Naghma. What seems to be now happening is that gradually we are looking at the Biden administration defining more clearly its priorities, moving from the theory of governance to almost the operational realities of governance, and gradually policy responses are becoming clearer. So in that sense, it's an interim report. It will lead to the final national security strategy, as tends to happen in America. There is a process that will eventually unfold, and we will get the final national security strategy a few months down the line. But what it has done is basically underscore some of the priorities for the US as it goes forward. And clearly, as you mentioned, rise of China being present there in almost, it's even when it is not mentioned, the China factor is the underpinning factor, binding a lot of themes together, whether it is cybersecurity, whether it is democracy, whether it is institutions, whether it is about Indo-Pacific, whether it is about alliances. And so clearly, you cannot get away from the China factor when it comes to when it comes to this report. And possibly this means that this is the frame through which Mr. Biden will take forward from when perhaps Mr. Trump left. And there are also echoes of Trump's worldview here, especially when you look at the economic security and foreign policy and national security are two sides of the same coin. Very interesting statement, which again basically reiterates what Trump highlighted over his term, that he is going to look at foreign policy through a domestic lens. And that is again what seems to be happening with Biden administration, clearly aiming for an economic policy which would help America achieve some of its national security objectives. And so I think there are a lot of ends here through which you can create a larger framework. But I think the aspect where perhaps it departs from Trump administration is to talk a lot about American principles, American ideals, as well as American alliances and multilateral system. So that has been again a theme where Mr. Biden has tried to distinguish himself from his predecessor. And that is again something that comes out very clearly in this document. How far they would go in that direction, how far it gets operationalized, how far this gets reflected in actual policies. Again, these are too early. This is too early to say. But I thought that this is that when you look at it, there is an attempt to make a distinction, as well as to carry forward some of the legacy issues of the predecessor. But I think again, India comes out very interestingly, and again is a very important partner, and which I think we will see unfolding over the next few months and years.
Yeah, Biden has vowed to deepen the partnership with India, New Zealand, Vietnam, the ASEAN countries. There's also a talk of strengthening the US alliances, and it talks of most robust presence in the Indo-Pacific and the Europe, and the vow to protect its allies. So, like you said, carrying forward some of its legacy as far as the China policy is concerned, but also taking America away from America first to America for the world, and reiterating America's leadership and not letting the leadership pass on to China the way it was happening, or at least it was perceived to happen during Trump's time. So the whole talk of alliance building and not going alone, that seems to be again the focus, which is being reiterated here in this policy document that has come out.
Yes, indeed, and I think that is, that seems to be the central message, that America will manage the rise of China with partners,
With
and
partners.
that is something that you see, whether it is the transatlantic alliance, whether it is the larger framework of its alliances in the Indo-Pacific. What is also significant, there were some concerns about Indo-Pacific, whether Mr. Biden would be as interested in this concept. And we have seen that, again, Indo-Pacific is now a very well accepted and very well entrenched term in the American lexicography, in the American, dictionary, policy dictionary now. So clearly, Indo-Pacific is now the heart of, in some ways, of American foreign policy response to China. And when they talk of a number of countries, including India, there is a sense that these are countries that are going to be important in managing the rise of China in the Indo-Pacific, and also bringing in Europeans into this discourse. Again, something that India has been, in fact, trying to do with great vigor, in reaching out to Europeans, Western Europeans, and reaching out to them, like France or Britain, or even countries like Germany and Netherlands, who have come up with an Indo-Pacific strategy or Indo-Pacific policies in their own ways, trying to shape that narrative that Indo-Pacific is not something which will be determined by simply by the rise of China, but Indo-Pacific is a maritime space where so many stakeholders are there, and all those stakeholders need to have a robust presence. And I think that's the way Biden administration is framing it at the moment, by reaching out to those stakeholders and bringing them into the Indo-Pacific, even as he's suggesting that he'll be building the alliances from a transatlantic perspective, where perhaps Russia is also termed as a very important adversary, or a competitor, or a challenge in that sense.
Absolutely, which leads to also the talk, or the vigor that we see around Quad and its members, and that also, I mean, China perceived it always as a grouping to counter China, but Quad, the members are now. We see a renewed energy, more meetings are likely to happen again. And that is very important. That again is a priority for the US to contain China in this area. So Quad, its significance, and what is it actually? I mean, also because, in spite of Quad, China is actually in a military conflict with a lot of Quad members. I mean, if you look at India, if you look at Australia, so what really has Quad done here?
Well, I think the biggest thing that seems to have been now happening is that Quad is becoming the focal platform around which a number of other conversations are taking place about Indo-Pacific, about what kind of platforms are needed in today's environment to manage China's rise. And Quad, given its inherent flexibility, has allowed some of those ideas to become more operational. So this discussion on millilaterals and plurilaterals that have been emerging, that we really don't have an architecture in the Indo-Pacific to manage the most important challenge that the region is facing, and that's a rapidly changing balance of power. Now, China has pushed this idea that this is potentially can be troubling because this is an Asian NATO, etc. But it is China's behavior that has contributed to Quad becoming this operation. If you recall, even a year back, the discussion around Quad was very amorphous. It was that, oh yes, it is there, but what can it possibly do? It's all, yes, foreign ministers have been meeting, but it is mostly targeted at soft issues. But even in the last year, we have had 3 important meetings of Quad foreign ministers, and we also have a very important, possibly even this month, we will have the top leaders meeting of the 4 countries, where Scott Morrison's statement, Australian Prime Minister's statement that came out recently, saying that he has already had conversations with Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Suga of Japan, and that President Biden is very likely to attend. So it's clearly there is now a vigor in this arrangement, which was missing in the past, and that has a lot to do with the fact that the region and the world has passed through a very difficult time, in which some of the challenges that China was posing to the region and to the world became more manifest than ever. And I think that is what it has taken for Quad to become a serious platform rather than a talk shop. So as I think it evolves into something more credible, you already are having, we are witnessing conversations happening, for example, around Quad Plus. That Quad itself can be the nucleus of a wider arrangement where other countries, other stakeholders
Yeah.
might join this platform or this arrangement to ensure that there is a that the stability exists in the largest balance of power in the region. And I think if that happens, and if the leaders, the four leaders that are likely to meet in you, this month, apparently, if they meet and they give a new sense of direction, certainly it will have important implications for the region, for the foreign policies of these four countries. And you can, as you were mentioning, we can look at individual countries like Australia, like India, which have been targeted specifically, individually by China, and the kind of consequences that have followed from there. That can potentially lead to something which can have a great, more tangible effect on the balance of power in the region.
Uh, you know, when we talk about Quad Plus and balance of power in the region, we also know that China has been in conflict with a lot of its neighbors, including countries like Vietnam, Philippines, and the recent pact between India and Philippines needs to be on the Brahmos, needs to be seen in this light. Is it a message to China? Of course, it would be. And how will it really affect this balance of power?
Uh, Philippines has been playing, this role of trying to balance China and the US for some time. And if you see, Duterte's statement over the last few years, he has been trying to, he has been annoying at some point. The Washington, and at others he has been trying to target Beijing. But what he has done very cleverly is to keep both the capitals, Beijing and Washington, on tenterhooks. He has given an indication that he will pursue very independent approach to Philippines, and wherever he will get the best deal, he will go there. Now with India, I think, given India's that India is not a party to this bipolar arrangement, there is a certain comfort with Philippines when it comes to India Philippines relationship, that it is devoid of that US China bipolarity. And therefore, when Philippines thinks of a defense relationship with India, and India is bolstering that defense relationship, it also stands on its own merit that as India extends its footprint in Southeast Asia, and as Philippines decides to move away from the US China bipolarity, both have important stakes in each other, and therefore they both can sustain each other's interests in a very important part of the region. So therefore we have seen movement on the Brahmos front uh, taking shape. In fact, Philippines has been much more categorical than Delhi, that they need Brahmos, that they would like Brahmos to be part of their inventory. And India has indicated that, contrary to India, there used to be a discussion about Vietnam being the first buyer. But we have seen that with Vietnam, things have not gone as well as perhaps they should have. But with Philippines, suddenly in the last few months, we have seen certainly a momentum in its engagement. And what has been signed is an implementation pact where which gives a framework to possibly the eventual sale of Brahmos to Philippines. Now, if it happens, I think certainly China will read it in a certain light.
Yeah.
It's China will read it as India trying to extend its footprint. But I think two things are happening. One, India is also looking at it in terms of extending its defense exports, because there is India wants to become a defense exporter. There's a target of 5 billion worth of defense exports by 2025 that India has laid out for itself, and Brahmos is seen as a very important part of that inventory. So clearly, for India, it is not simply about
China.
giving an important defense equipment to a country that perhaps may or may not use it in a certain conflict. But this is also about India positioning itself as a defense supplier, as a provider of security, as a net provider of security, and also ramping up its own ambitions in the region. For Philippines, of course, it's simply a question of trying to get out of the straitjacket of US and China, and bringing in other stakeholders in the region, in South China Sea, where I think things are getting murkier. China's rise is getting palpable by the day. And I think with India's presence in South China Sea, with India's presence in important countries in the region like Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia, certainly for these countries, that creates a relatively stable balance of power than only US and China dominating the discourse.
Absolutely. So it gives them the opportunity of coming out of that straitjacket of China and America, as you pointed out. So India's presence in the region is reassuring for the other countries in that region. And our External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has visited Bangladesh, Harsh, and met his counterpart there and reiterated that Bangladesh is very important for us as far as India's Act East policy is concerned. And the relationship between India and Bangladesh have been on an upswing in the last few years. If we see, there has been a virtual summit in December. Modi is likely to visit again. It follows Jaishankar's visit. Looking at all that and Bangladesh's importance in the region, Jaishankar's visit right now and the talks that took place, how do you see the relationship shaping up currently between India and Bangladesh, and what's the future really? What are we aiming at, and what are we looking at in the coming few? Not talking about a long time frame, but how will it really alter things?
I would say, Naghma, two things. One is, of course, this visit in particular was aimed at laying the groundwork for Prime Minister's eventual visit later this month. And this is going to be a very high-profile visit. This is going to be a visit that I think was supposed to happen last year, and it got postponed. But this is also a very important year in the Indo-Bangladesh relationship with the 50 years of independence and Bangladesh War of Liberation and 50 years of diplomatic ties. So clearly, I think both countries want to celebrate the relationship. Both countries want to underscore how important they are for each other in the regional matrix, how important they are for developmental concerns, and what I think this government has done, compared to other neighbors, the investment in Bangladesh has been quite significant, both in terms of the way economic and trade ties have evolved, but also in the way highest levels of leadership has invested. If you look at the number of visits, if you look at the number of interactions, I think that there's been a very, very serious attempt at bringing Bangladesh into, making Bangladesh the core foreign policy priority of India in the neighborhood. And I think the results are there for us to see in the last few years. We have seen, as you were pointing out, an upswing in the relationship. There are challenges for sure, but I think Bangladesh can really be looked at very, very differently today as, say, compared to 7 or 8 or 6 years before. What I think the other element of India-Bangladesh relation that has evolved is that with India now shifting its focus to the east, irrespective of the fact that we now have a ceasefire with Pakistan, I think that the Indian foreign policy in the neighborhood is largely predicated on what happens on the eastern frontier in the Bay of Bengal. And with India now increasingly invested in the east, Bangladesh becomes the most important partner for India, not simply in terms of saying, look, this is a look east policy that Bangladesh is very important to, but also in the larger Indo-Pacific paradigm, that this Bangladesh becomes an entry point for India into the wider maritime space that India is now talking about. And that is increasingly becoming the part of the narrative. We had not seen Bangladesh being talked of in the Indo-Pacific construct so far, but that's beginning to change. And therefore, Bangladesh's role in Indian foreign policy is going to get only higher in the coming years, and you cannot get away from it. And therefore, investment by India is timely. Investment by India is needed, and investment by India in Bangladesh relationship is the strategic necessity of our times.
Looking at the importance of Bangladesh in India's foreign policy, or actually the entire Indo-Pacific context, as you're saying, and the widening, maritime space that India is now looking at, Bangladesh is more and more important for India. And looking at that, this visit and the visit that follows, the summit that is going to happen, is very, very important, significant for us. So that's it from us on this episode of the Ideas Factory. We'll see you next week. Thank you, and thank you, Harsh, for joining in.
Thank you.